Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome to our second night of the Dhul Hijjah nights. We are honored to have with us the Imam of Jesus, Son of Mary Mosque from the Lehigh Valley, Sheikh Ahmed Zain, and we'll begin with his recitation. تفضل.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ذلك بأن الله هو الحق وأنه يحيي الموتى وأنه على كل شيء قدير وأن الساعة آتية لا ريب فيها وأن الله يبعث من في القبور ومن الناس من يجادل في الله بغير علم ولا هدى ولا كتاب منير ثاني عطفه ليضل عن سبيل الله له في الدنيا خزي ونذيقه يوم القيامة عذاب الحريق ذلك بما قدمت يداك وأن الله ليس بظلام للعبيد ومن الناس من يعبد الله على حرف فإن أصابه خير اطمأن به وإن أصابته فتنة انقلب على وجهه خسر الدنيا والآخرة ذلك هو الخسران المبين يدعو من دون الله ما لا يضره وما لا ينفعه ذلك هو الضلال البعيد يدعو لمن ضره أقرب من نفعه لبئس المولى ولبئس العشير إن الله يدخل الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار إن الله يفعل ما يريد من كان يظن أن لن ينصره الله في الدنيا والآخرة فليمدد بسبب إلى السماء ثم ليقطع فلينظر هل يذهبن كيده ما يغيظ وكذلك أنزلناه آيات بينات وأن الله يهدي من يريد
Alhamdulillah, it's a great recitation. We're lucky we can hear different reciters, and perhaps something special about this Lehigh Valley area, Sheikh Yusuf,
MashaAllah.
where the different mosques and imams have shown their unity in Ramadan, and we're seeing that again now with Eid al-Adha.
MashaAllah. May Allah put barakah in everyone's efforts and always keep our hearts united. InshaAllah. Cooperative.
I mean, so if we continue from where we left off, verse number 6. And so God is He who is the ultimate truth and ever constant, and He gives life to the dead, and He has full power over everything. This is really connected, I guess, with the last verse that we read yesterday about the Ba'ath, al-Maut, about the hereafter. And the next verse, and the last hour is sure to come. There is no doubt about it. And God will surely raise up all who are in the graves. Just a simple reminder, if we only believed in some sort of spiritual resurrection, all these doubts of the Meccans and all the proofs of the Quran of the water coming and the dead earth coming back to life would have meant nothing, because I don't think the Quraysh will have an issue of imagining a resurrection of the plants. But when they see a physical resurrection on earth, and then the Quran says, وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ يَبْعَثُ مَنْ فِي الْقُبُورِ, it's talking about physical resurrection. Just because sometimes, if we're not fully aware about, or in our tasawwurat of the imagination of the hereafter, we sometimes can fall into the trap of imagining it to be a spiritual resurrection. But we believe that the resurrection, the hereafter, is more physical, more real than this world.
SubhanAllah.
Right? That is the real hayawan, the real life, not that hayawan verse. I think these two verses really conclude that first page, that وَأَنَّ السَّاعَةَ آتِيَةٌ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهَا. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we recapped yesterday, He mentions, begins with painting the image very clearly, crystal clear, and then provides rational reasons for it too, addressing the human's khayal, and then addressing the human's rational mind, convincing him both of the hereafter, and then giving the final conclusive sentence that there's no doubt in it.
There's no, questioning the fact that the Quran here is giving us everyday examples of death or shades of death. Because even we don't believe that the death of the human being is an extinction of that human being. Sometimes we have the wrong understanding of death, that we think of death, it means an ending of the human being. But ending, rather, is not an extinction of the human being. In this case, when we talk about death, it's an ending of one phase of life and the beginning of another phase of life, which is not temporary, which is permanent, whereas this phase is temporary. And we indirectly touched on this point last time, how the Quran is providing proofs for the reality of resurrection. But the two examples that are given is the fact that the human being came from nothing. The human being was dead, so to speak, then it comes to life. So that's more difficult to bring life from death than to resurrect life once again after it was, alive. And the same thing with the earth is shown as in that example, that the earth, it has that state of death to it, in the sense that life, plant life is gone, but then it comes back to life and is renewed once again. And so the power of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, the Qudra of Allah, is really one of the main points for reflection here, but it's not brought to the fore. It's not saying this is the power of Allah. The Quran is giving us imagery that we relate to, that speaks to our senses. So our senses can comprehend that.
And imagery that we see every day around us.
Yes, imagery that we see every day. And then it takes us to that which is not so easily comprehensible. It takes us to the more abstract reality of how it is that the universe, or at least life on earth, is operational, right? That there's these cycles in motion, and that we're part of that. And I don't think anyone, even the atheist, would deny that there's some sort of cyclical reality or something that's operational on the earth. They necessarily don't go with design, order theory, but they know that there's some rules. That's the only way they can account for cause and effect. And this is one of the things that Ustad Sayyid Nursi Rahmatullahi alayhi, he always wages. He says, if you really believed in cause and effect, then you would have to submit to Tawheed or belief in the oneness of Allah, or else your whole logic about how the material world is operational, it falls into a contradiction, because then each thing will have to operate independently, and each thing will have to have its own logic, and there's no greater logic, no greater purpose. So that's really a world of what we call abath, or purposelessness.
And you have to believe in a lot of impossibilities, millions of gods, not one God.
Yes. And I think that there's, real here, we talked about the idea of imagery before, but here this imagery is not the type of imagery that you can say, well, this is a nice imaginative scenario, but it's not possible. You see what I'm saying? No, this is an imagery which is operational, is taking place.
That's right.
You can't contradict it. You can't go against it. It's an imagery which is stable and constant in the world. But the reality that we're being told is that, look, that is just what you see at face value. It's a phenomena. But the reality is that Allah is the one that is moving all of that. Allah is the one that's in charge of that. Allah is the one that is in charge of life and death. So why is it that if you see these things of how life and death is operational in your daily life, even in our own experience, that we were not in existence and we come into existence, how is it that we can deny when Allah is telling us, that we will come back to be judged, after we leave from this realm of life? So the whole of our existence is being used against us in many ways, because we're given an understanding of the book of creation to understand the book of Revelation. And the book of Revelation, which is the Quran, is talking to us, is telling us, reflect upon the creation, and you will understand Revelation. Revelation is telling us the same thing, reflect upon the creation, and you will understand.
True. Each book is saying to look at the other book for proof.
Right, and the Quran itself is also showing us how we in ourselves are a book. As individuals, as human beings.
Jazakallah khair. Continuing verse number 8. And yet among people there are some who dispute about God without having any true knowledge or any true guidance or an enlightening book. I'll keep, because these two verses come sort of they come in pairs. They keep on disputing arrogantly to lead people astray from God's way. For such there is disgrace in the world, and on the day of resurrection we will cause them to taste the punishment of the scorching fire. This punishment is the outcome of what you have committed and forwarded with your own hands, and never does God do the least wrong to his servants.
Yes. What's the first impression that you get there? There's something that comes to me, but I want to see.
Which verse?
The combination of the verses, actually. Those are three ayat, and when you take them together, and even when you relate them to the rest of the ayat, there's a certain meaning that, and yabrus, or it becomes clear, manifest, distinct.
Please, you share it. I'm sure.
One of the things is, the first thing is that I want to be a little philosophical, then come back to be a little more simple or clear. This philosophical stuff is abstract sometimes. Here in the 8th ayat, when Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is talking about those amongst humanity, that personage or that persona that argues about Allah without any revealed knowledge, there's an epistemological point that's being made. And here we're talking about human beings. They exist in the physical world. You can see them. The Quran is outlining the development of the human being. The Quran is very clearly saying that the human beings came, they were non-existent and they come into existence and they go through a process. And then that process doesn't end at this level of life on earth, but also there's an unseen dimension. So the Quran here, it identifies that being, the human being, in which the process of that human being's life and the stages of life are talked about. And I was saying, well, the human being that is not even clear about his or her own origin, or didn't even know about his or her own development, has the audacity to talk about something which they have to be informed about, right? To have clarity on it. Some human beings may be able to use their intellect to a certain point to come to some conclusion that there's something out there or something called God, but to get clarity of who God is and what is our relationship to God, revelation has to come in. Yeah. So the Quran is coming and showing the limitation of the human being. At the level of life, the human being is not permanent. At the level of intellect, meaning that the human being's knowledge is limited. And at the ridiculous nature of the human being to enter into the realm of the unseen without any reference point. They're just speculating without any basis.
No knowledge, no book.
No knowledge, no book. Yes, the world itself points to Allah's existence. But Allah left this situation of the human being not really being clear on if Allah exists or not, to the reality of prophethood. Prophethood is what clarifies for us Allah's existence in the certainty, because we're getting a revelation that clarifies for us the creation. We know people that we live on the earth together with them. They look and read the creation, but they read the creation and they're not clear. Even in this time period, you have people that believe in God in the time period when the Quran is revealed. They believe in God, but they're not clear on the issue of resurrection.
Yeah.
You see, so the intellect has its limitation in this regard. We're not denying the role of the intellect. And so that's the first thing, that the human being has limitation in that this type of knowledge, the knowledge of revelation, is guidance to understanding ourselves, our life, and the creation itself and the unseen. And then it shows another factor that is coming to play here. It's not only the intellectual factor that the human being is limited and the human being needs assistance to gain clarity and gain real insight about existence and the meaning of life, but here now the issue of choice comes into play. That the human being is responsible for whether they gain success or they take on a failure. And here we're talking about success in terms of our relationship to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, or even getting the picture clear. All right. And so, at the end of the day, the series of ayat, the third ayat, it closes off with saying that is the recompense for all the evil that your two hands have advanced in the world.
Many often times in the Quran, I noticed the pattern where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning the punishment, and it straight away clarifies the human agency, which you referred to, the ikhtiyar or the willpower. Like you said, ذَلِكَ بِمَا قَدَّمَتْ يَدَاكَ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ لَيْسَ بِظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ.
Right. Yes.
So because automatically the first question that comes, you don't even utter it, but the Quran is addressing questions that you don't even dare to pronounce. It's talking about a question that come to you. You haven't even perhaps consciously thought of it, but it's in your subconscious. Is Allah, someone's going to be in punishment in hellfire forever? But it already says because what your hands have sent forth, so it's already pointing to the human agency.
Yes.
And Allah does not do dhulm. But a lot of the times, if we notice very particularly, one of the root causes of going astray is one, arrogance, ثاني عطفه, where here when it's translated as they keep on disputing arrogantly. But I think other translations, how does your one have it? Verse number 8.
Among humankind, there's the type of person who argues about God without any revealed knowledge nor any divine guidance.
The next verse.
He turns himself aside, nor an illuminating heavenly book. He turns himself aside from the truth in disdain in order to lead people astray from the path of God.
That's the more common interpretation. He turns himself in disdain. There's an arrogance. And then there's also this active working of liyudilla al-nasa. He just hasn't made his mind about God, because people say, okay, if someone doesn't believe, why is he so much punishable? That's a separate issue. But the Quran is highlighting two things. One is not believing due to arrogance. And secondly, he's got this active intention of misleading others. Like, again, it comes to لِيُضِلًّا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Whether it's conscious or subconscious. And then finally, it really, like you said, points to the human agency.
You know what's something that comes up that's really interesting here? That everything that has proceeded in terms of our reflection, in terms of the creation, all of it is pointing to the reality of Allah, even the human being. Right? But here, the human being, Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala says in the Arabic, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يُجَادِلُ. Right? So the reality is that it's almost as though kufr or disbelief, or even the point of doubting, right? Maybe that's taking it to an extreme, but the person that's the believer is confident in the reality of the meaning of life, and in this case, in the belief in the unseen, the belief in the oneness of God, and the belief in the gathering and the resurrection, which is what this surah is pointing to in terms of teachings. But here, when the human being is in a state of kufr, the human being stops doing its job, his or her job. And the job is to reflect that Allah exists through character, to action. So here becomes a point that the human being is no longer, that it's like when you look at the rest of the creation, if you contemplate it and you reflect upon it, it will take your reason to a point to either believe with certainty that Allah exists. That can happen to the creation to a certain extent, and then your belief is clarified through revelation, or it can get you close enough to kind of ask, does life mean something more? But think about the human being that is astray and leads others astray, and the complex confusion that comes in that, where people now the character of the person is that which causes a person to doubt in love, to doubt in trust, to doubt in the beauty of life, and to experience meaninglessness, and even a sense of hell on earth before, what was the outcome. Whereas the person that is the believer, the characteristics of that person are characteristics that when you interact with that person, you begin to have confidence in humanity. You have a sense of trust. You feel secure. There's a beauty that's there. There's a belief in the power of goodness. You know how we say, oh, this is a nice person. The experience, the vibration, the interaction is totally different. But so it's almost as though that person is separated out from the role of what humanity, plays.
It's an exception.
It's an exception, yes. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ. Because, as Muslims, we don't believe that the human being was created as evil. The human being is essentially good. It's a creation of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And so then, kufr takes on that role that is not only that the person is taking on rejection of Allah, but the behavior of the person is that which is destructive, because it misleads away from the path to Allah.
Now on the first page it also had وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يُجَادِلُ فِي اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ, but it didn't have, it did not have the وَلَا هُدًى وَلَا كِتَابٍ مُنِيرٍ. It just said those who argue about God without knowledge.
Okay,
according to the Zamakhshari here, apparently it says that those who are mentioned in this page, verses 8 and 9, as disputing about God, they're the corrupt, rebellious, and mischievous devils mentioned in verse 3. Before yesterday we read وَيَتَّبِعُ كُلَّ شَيْطَانٍ مَرِيدٍ.
Yes.
According to Zamakhshari, this Sahib al-Kashaf, he's saying these verses 8 and 9 explains who that shaitan al-marid is, because it can be from the ins and jinn.
Right.
And it's giving more particular detail about it. But I also just want to point out that when we hear وَمَنْ أَسْمَى يُجَادِلُ فِي اللَّهِ, amongst people, those who argue about God, we think it's all the way straight away from kafir. And that's probably the obvious meaning. But it's يُجَادِلُ فِي اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Sometimes it can come from Muslims as well. The attribute is what's really problematic. Sometimes we can also indulge in unhealthy debates about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're talking about detailed matters of perhaps theology, that there is no explicit revelation, there is no guidance. Maybe there's some interpretations, but we argue about it as if it's like haqless batil. And that's also, I think, a bit, I don't know if this verse can also be applicable to that as well. Sometimes when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I forgot the verse, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحَذِّرُكُمْ نَفْسَهُ. Allah warns you about His own nafs. Don't argue about Him. According to some scholars, think about Allah's ni'mah in the world, but don't think about Allah's that.
Yes.
Because it's a bit beyond imagination. If it's beyond imagination, then should also be beyond arguing. Sometimes sukut, silence, is the best thing in some matters.
Yeah, that's the most safe, rational path in that regard. One thing, you mentioned something here, and I had taken some notes, and we talked about it before, that we have to keep in mind that this sort of is addressing three groups of people: the disbelievers, those that are wavering, and the believers. But also, if we contextualize more, those who were people of shirk from Mecca, those wavering Muslims who are not clear exactly about whether there's this idea of resurrection or whatever it may be, or even you can include that to people that may believe in God. They may not have come into Islam fully, but they believe in God and they exist in that population. And also the third party is the believers that are firm. The interesting thing here, and we touched on it a little bit last time, but revisiting the point I think is important, is that this surah is unique in that it's classified as being Mecki and Medini.
Yeah.
It has a combination of elements of address to the time period before Hijrah and the last stage of the Meccan existence of the Muslims before they made Hijrah to Medina, and the first stage of Medina life. Another thing that's interesting about it is that it was revealed during the daytime and the night, while the Prophet was traveling, while they were residing during peacetime and during war. And so when we begin to contextualize that reality to the seerah or to the life of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, we get this idea of what's going on in the actual everyday life of the Muslims as this surah is being revealed. What's happening to them?
But it's almost like you're saying it's been revealed in all states.
Yes.
Mecca, Medina, war, peace. And in a way, this surah sort of addresses all these different psychological states.
Yes.
Sometimes the mufassir say, okay, this verse refers to munafiqeen, this one to kuffar.
Yes.
But when a Muslim wakes up in the morning and he goes to sleep, how many different identities he's thinking under throughout the day? If something difficult happens to him,
right? Yeah.
His iman might waver a little.
Right. And
sometimes those verses are there. Man ya'budullah ala harfin.
Yes.
That applies to him.
Yes.
So sometimes I think if you had to psychologically categorize human beings, you might find that the spectrum is a lot. And the verse you're right, this surah is something that sort of it's applicable at all times. I think also the surah begins with the Ayyuhan Nas, and it's commonly said that those verses are more Meccan type verses, whereas Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, you who believe, are more Medina. Obviously, everything we say about Revelation, Mecca, Medina, everything has to be nothing should be taken absolute, right? Because the evidence of this are not as qat'i as sometimes people assume to be.
Right, and it has the universal aspects in that regard. It's a surah which combines and address to all of humanity.
Yeah.
In like what you're saying in its various psychological stages, and always keeping in mind the reality of death, because Hajj itself,
Yeah.
it is the mashhad of Yawm al-Qiyamah.
Yeah.
Is like a descriptive of what is to be on the Day of Judgment.
Yeah.
In the fate of humanity, reality of death, while at the same time containing within it the reality of the struggle for Tawheed.
Yeah.
Because this is the surah that is named Hajj, is named after one of the arkan of Islam, and associated with that is the reality of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam.
And these are coming up.
These things are coming up, and the point that you made is excellent. The idea of what is our psychological state with regard to our relationship to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala when hardship and ease are in our lives. And that issue, it comes back again. We can leave it for that time.
So, let's continue now. It's a bit one of the, personally for me, a bit of a scary verse. Among people, verse number 11, among people there are also many, one who worships God on the borderline of faith, ala harf, in expectation of only worldly gains. If any good befalls them, he is satisfied with it. But if a trial afflicts him, he turns away utterly, reverting back to unbelief. He thereby incurs loss of both this life and the hereafter. This indeed is the obvious loss. He invokes apart from God that which can neither harm nor benefit him. That indeed is straying very far away. And verse number 13, he even invokes that the being that is far more likely to cause harm than benefit. What evil a patron, and what evil an associate. I read it together because it sort of, again, connects.
This is another reality.
Some narrations mention that this refers to particular Bedouin tribes who were new in Islam, and they were expecting a bit of quick worldly gain from the Islam, and it sort of explains their situation. But we're looking at it more the universal application, because
I think it's important to keep that in mind, because it's in this phase which we're beginning to see the manifestation of the idea of the persona of the munafiq, or the hypocrite.
Yeah.
The one who externalizes the practice of Islam, but it hasn't settled in the heart, so to speak. In their heart, they're disbelievers. Sometimes we get the idea of nifaq, or hypocrisy, confused with what's understood in the general culture. Here this is nifaq of kufr, nifaq of unbelief, or the hypocrisy which is equated with unbelief. Whereas what we in the general culture call hypocrisy is inconsistency between our practice and what we believe. But here the idea of nifaq, is definitely, something that is becoming more and more apparent because of the time frame of revelation. And we know that in the early Meccan phases, the idea of hypocrisy wasn't really dealt with much. It was the idea of belief, and a person is a believer in disbelief. So situation is becoming more complicated.
And you just mentioned that this verse of Samuel was revealed in Medina, and perhaps we've fallen straight onto a verse that was revealed in Medina. But I guess the overall thing here is obviously,
there's no
seeing everything coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not wavering.
Yes.
That manqibah that's narrated from Abu Hanifa, they say, your business's trade was lost, and he just says Alhamdulillah, and then he goes, all of it was found again, Alhamdulillah. His reaction doesn't really differ much, because ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking for our reaction. The stimuli is coming from him, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, but it's our reactions that make us, fasabara wa shakara, that makes a difference, and you can get the benefit of both.
Well, this is not an easy ayat.
It's not
an easy ayat if we talk about the spiritual dimensions of where the human being is at. Here the Quran is really identifying for us an embedded aspect of life. And that is that life itself on the human plane and in this dimension, the earthly dimension in this time, before resurrection, before judgment, is not a place of unchanging states. Meaning that there's no constant happiness and there's no constant unhappiness, or there's no constant state of benefit or constant state of harm. Tilka ayyam nudawwilha bayna an-nas. We all have our share of good moments and bad moments as we may see. But the Quran is pushing us in many ways, it seems, to have this belief in the unseen, in which we're believing that life is purposeful, even though it may not seem in the moment to feel that way. That the promise of Allah is true, but that requires some commitment to believe in hope in the future, which is not manifest to us in the moment, because we may be suffering in the moment. That there's a greater purpose.
Yeah.
That's not easy. You know what I'm saying? That's not easy. And so the Quran itself is like this GPS that's guiding us, where we don't know where we're going, but it's telling us where to go and what's coming next, and is giving us guidance as life is unfolding and life is putting us to the test. You know what I'm saying? And so that persona, is something is important. You alluded to this. I always, just to give the ajr to, so one of my teachers, Dr. Qasbi Zalat, who was Zalat, one of the scholars of Al-Azhar and Tafsir, he always talked about...
He's alive?
He's alive, yes. He talked about returning. I believe he's still alive, actually. He was pretty old. I'm not sure if he's still alive. It's a few of my teachers have passed away so far. May Allah have mercy on them. But he talked about the Quran as the qualities that we see in the personas in the Quran. Not to think about them as people out there, but those qualities to reflect, to use the Quran as a mirror to look up to ourselves. Do we have these qualities? You were alluding to that. And so in this case, do we have that quality, that when life, is not so good with us, so to speak, in how we see life, as far as good and bad, that we fall off in our practice, and then to go deeper, why are we falling off in our practice when life trials and tribulations come, instead of it being a moment for us to call to Allah? What is it that's pushing us away from calling to Allah in those moments when it would appear that our dua, our crying out to Allah, or beseeching Allah, or seeking of Allah will be more sincere, because, we're in that moment not depending upon, everything in life seems to fail us. So in that moment, it should seem easier to turn to Allah. But what happens sometimes in this state is that actually we become numb and we turn away from Allah because life is not easy, or we're not gaining, facility or ease or benefit in the material sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like sometimes we should be obviously thankful. We don't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for calamities, but in difficult times, it's easier to connect to Him. It opens the doors of dua become easier.
But for this persona, no.
For this persona, no. But it's unfortunate, right? But even the choice of wording, it's unfortunate. It says, فَإِنْ أَصَابَهُ خَيْرٌ اطْمَأَنَّ بِهِ.
Yes.
أَلَا تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ إِلَّا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. When I hear the word itminan, it's used in the salat as well, to move until you reach this. But tuma'nina, especially with that dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's where the hearts find real peace and comfort. To have that level of satisfaction from goodness that comes from a worldly thing, it's a bit not befitting for a believer,
Yeah, I would hope that you go into that further, because it seems as that يناقض التوحيد.
Yeah.
To depend upon the good of the world.
Yeah.
In that way, you know what I'm saying? It seems to go against, it seems as though we're trading the material, the creation, for our relationship with Allah.
Yeah, yeah. And also the heart has certain feelings reserved for very high things. There's portions of the heart should not be so overjoyed with low things from the world. And here, Ustaz Yusuf, with the interest of time, I'm just going to move on. And, as our brothers and sisters are watching here, we have to remind ourselves this is an ocean with the Surah Hajj, and it's universal, like you said, Mecca, Medina, all states, it's all humanity. We are only trying to grasp some droplets of this ocean, seeing if we can grab some meanings and moving on. We're having some difficult verses coming up as well. By difficult, I mean this verse that Allah is really saying that you should really. It's speaking to the core of the human being that you should really worship the thing that benefits you. A lot of the people, the times we're banking on things that are not benefiting us nor harming us. And then it says in the next verse, which can appear like a slight contradiction, but it's not. It's just extra highlighting that in fact its harm is more than its benefit. Maybe because it's so useless, its harm is more than its benefit. Allahu Alam. Before I also mentioned khizyi dunya, I noticed these two things often come in the Quran. Khizyi dunya wa adhab al-akhirah. The disgrace in this world and the punishment in the hereafter. If I'm not sure if it's mentioned in the ma'thurat or not, but I've read these du'as from the Salihin. Allahumma jinna min khizyi dunya wa adhab al-akhirah. Allah save us from the disgrace of this world and the punishment of the hereafter. It's almost like those who get punishment in the hereafter suffer some form of disgrace in this world, either during their life or after their life. Even Abu Jahl was, although he was Abu al-Hakam, the wise man, but for the rest of his worldly remembrance, he's referred to as Abu Jahl. It's a disgrace. Obviously, the hereafter is also akhza, according to another verse. Verse number 14, continuing. Surely God will admit those who believe and do good, righteous deeds into the gardens through which rivers flow. Surely God does whatever He wills. Like the God that this other person was invoking, although outwardly he might have been a Muslim, because he believes in Allah, but it gives him no benefit or no harm. The real God is the one who gives the biggest benefit and He's the one that can place His believing servants.
That's an interesting play, because before the Quran was proposing directly, making clear, not proposing, but making clear the reflection that Allah is the one that has life and death in His hands, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here, indirectly, it's teaching us that harm and benefit is really with Allah. That nothing in the creation can harm you or benefit you. And then here is talking about the two personas came up. One is the one that worships the idols. And basically, they're not believing in the unseen and the reality of harm and benefit being with Allah. And then the person that believes in Allah, but when harm comes their way, so to speak, or basically life is disrupted for them, then they confuse what is the real source of harm and benefit as something that you were alluding to, but it seems as though that play is there, some things, but it is brought forward indirectly. Like, focus on really where is the source of harm and benefit. If you could clarify your understanding of life, if you had a true source of giving you guidance on what life is about, then you will have an understanding of not only life and death, but also where your benefit is at and where your harm is at. You see? Yeah. See that kind of...
The true source is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, we'll go to the last verse, Sheikh Yusuf, number 15. And this verse is somewhat, we both said, mushkil. We can only share what we know of. Inshallah, maybe Allah will send some mufassirs. Maybe they're listening right now or in the future. Or maybe they have already been explained in some of the tafsirs. We haven't had the chance to read all the tafsirs as well. I must myself declare that. Whoever thinks that God will not help the messenger to victory in the world and to prosperity in the hereafter, then let him move heaven and earth to prevent his help. Let him stretch out a rope to heaven and then sever that rope to descend without being broken into pieces. Then let him see whether the schemes he makes will be of any avail to him and whether he can do away with what enrages him. Before I get your thoughts on this, we just have to remind our brothers, sisters and ourselves that each translation that we're reading is ultimately an interpretation. And one scholar said, he goes, reading the translation of the Quran is a task for the scholars. For students of knowledge like ourselves, like myself, it's to read tafsir. But maybe for this particular verse, we can look at a few other ones. Abdul Halim's translation reads it as, anyone who thinks that God will not support him in this world and the next should stretch a rope to the sky, climb all the way up to it, climb all the way up it, and see whether this strategy removes the cause of his anger. It's a bit not fully clear. Ibn Ashur is given 3 alternative suggestions who it could be, 3 alternative groups, who this third group can be. I think one thing that's very clear is that, and also God would not help here. Ustad Ali Unal has chosen the messenger in some translation, but it could also mean the person themselves. If anyone has fallen into despair, then whatever they do is gonna, there's no means. And Allah subhanahu, like you were saying just before we started this discussion, that it's actually tying a rope to the sky or hanging off. It's not even probable. It's almost like, I think you were, if I got you right, was with the impossibility of the thought that they're in as a source of hope. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is almost given like an impossible analogy to address that. The analogy that Allah gives matches their inner state is what I got from your words, but these are some of the things I get from it. What are your thoughts on this? So maybe we'll finish up with this.
Yeah, here it says, and so it finishes off, and so it is, next ayah, and so it is that with lucid examples or clear examples we have sent down the Quran's clear verses, for indeed Allah guides with it whomever he so wills. There's no doubt that some of the language that's there can lead to imagery which is, wow, it's a little stunning. Why would the Quran bring this example up? But I think that the reality of facing and confronting death is something that is put to the fore here. You know what I'm saying? See, see if that's going to help you. If you confront your own death, you know what I'm saying? See if it's going to remove, your despair. See if that is going to benefit you. But when you have that hope and that belief that Allah will aid the messenger, and make him triumphant, which it happened already. Yeah, this is not something that didn't happen. This ayah is one of those ayats which has a miraculous nature to it, in that it predicted the outcome of the Prophet ﷺ's efforts as a prophet. That in the end the Prophet was triumphant, and that this belief didn't triumph amongst his people, and that their relationships changed with Islam, and they bettered with Islam, and their conditions, went from one of ignorance to one of knowledge, and they prospered under Islam. Even those that wanted to come into Islam, but they didn't want to struggle for Islam, they saw the prosperity that came along with the believers struggling and striving and going to, because remember that this is a time period in which they had to leave. They had to leave their possessions, they had to leave their community, they had to leave their stability, and they had to make migration to Medina. And so, we see here that a person that doesn't want to believe in this obvious fact, which becomes clear at that time, it's not clear that the Prophet is going to be triumphant. And there was that group of the hypocrites that they were waiting to see, well, should we go? We'll wait and see. If his team wins, then we'll join his team. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So either way, this didn't, whether they tried to take a hold or ownership of their own deaths, in this sense of taking themselves to their own perdition, that didn't remove the fact that Allah, benefits the human being. Because after all, here, the idea would be, if you doubt in the resurrection, and if you think that with death itself life comes to an end and there's nothing more, you know what I'm saying, then if you were to believe that, would that belief stop what Allah's plan is? You know what I'm saying? It continues. You know, Allah's plan continued, and we saw the victory in the life of the messenger. But not only that, you know, the outcome of that is even worse. Yeah, because here we're talking about suicide. You know, a person
just in case the brothers and sisters might not be, why you just mentioned suicide is because some translations, the tafsirs that we looked at, and this is what sort of makes it hard for us to discuss, particularly in these times when the prevalence of mental health issues and the sensitivities that's required.
Right.
Whoever thinks that Allah, Dr. Mustafa Khattab translates it like this, whoever thinks that Allah will not help his prophet, he chose the prophet, meaning. So our brothers and sisters will have noticed that you can either translate it as Allah will not help his prophet, or Allah will not help him, the person himself. In this world and the hereafter, let them stretch out a rope to the ceiling, not the sky, the ceiling it's given, because we said the Arabic, the sama could mean saq, and strangle themselves. Then let them see if this plan will do away with the cause of their rage. It's as if Allah is saying, this rage that's in you, nothing's going to get rid of it.
Except turning to Allah.
Except turning to Him.
Yes.
La mafara min Allah illa ilayh.
Yes, death itself is not going to remove that from you.
Yeah.
You know, or approaching death itself in that way is not. The only hope that you have for yourself is to confront the fact that you have to admit that Allah exists and that there's an accountability that the human being has, you know, to take a hold of. We're accountable for our lives. Life is meaningful. You know what I'm saying? And if you plunge into that reality that life is not meaningful, that is not going to take away what it is that you're experiencing.
This is, for me, my personal approach, Sheikh Yusuf, with a verse like this is, park this verse also. You know, we always ask for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for afiyah, but we don't know what day, what times ahead lie. Maybe there'll be a time where there's a human can go to a stage where rage has just overtaken him and he can't get out of this rage, anger, this ghayl that he's in. And maybe in that state, a person will understand this verse in a way that it'll be, you know, not understandable right now.
And the reality, too, Sheikh, like, you know,
Allah a'lam bi muradihi, yani.
Yeah, but the reality is that we have seen, there's even studies that have shown that kufr and this type of kufr, you know, the philosophers, they tried to make the idea, some Western non-believing atheist philosophers try to make the idea that your freedom comes with disbelief in God. Nietzsche and others tried to make that claim. And we've even seen Nietzsche, the way that he passed away. Nietzsche, he died of syphilis. It wasn't necessarily the best life. The same thing with people like Foucault, Michel Foucault, died of AIDS. You know, and he was always looking for these liberating experiences, and his philosophy led to a lot of the issues that we see today with human identity and problems in sexuality and so on and so forth. But we've seen psychological studies even have proven the benefits of belief in the sense of the power of hope, right? And the power of belief in God. Whether people want to take that route, that's up to them. But the Quran is extending, you know, the idea of hope, and the Quran is always talking about the futility of despair and the destructiveness that comes from despair, and we see that
by sometimes highlighting the despair and other options.
Yes,
all the other doors are filled with despair, except for the door to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes, the door for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the door of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that of love, hope, mercy, tranquility. And the other doors, the door of disbelief is the door where a person is opening their own hell upon themselves. And they're trapped in it, and they're the ones that are taking them there. Why? Because Allah can't force you to, Allah is not going to force you to believe, is better language said. Allah's not going to force you to believe. It's something that we ourselves have to embark. You know, we have to embark upon the role or the path of Iman by our choice. You know, and that's kind of what we're being forced to, like, in that sense. You know, I didn't want to use that language in relation to Allah, you know, but, you know, we're being pushed into that direction. Like, what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to take responsibility And these are the paths that are before you. There's life of meaning, and then there's life without meaning. And the life without meaning is only going to lead you to your own despair and and you will fall into absurdity. And to be honest with you, these things are talked about in philosophy. They're talked about by existentialist philosophers. They're talked about by postmodern philosophers, the meaningless of life, and so on and so forth. And they acknowledge that, at the end, that you're stuck with having to create your own meaning.
Yeah.
And we see with the rise of mental health that in reality, that's not a viable path for the human being.
Yeah.
It just leads to perpetual and layered despair. And, we're being taught by life itself, the value of turning to Allah, and we know the power of prayer. You know what I'm saying? The power of prayer and the miraculous nature of prayer, how prayer changes situations, circumstances. We've seen in the past where it was considered an absurdity, unscientific, and then now, you even see within doctors how they encourage it. You see within cancer patients, how the idea of hopefulness and thinking about the good, how and
it has real effects.
It has real effects. Yeah. Has real effects on
the placebo has a real effect, and that's just a placebo.
Yes.
But real hope, real prayer, with a belief, it's even higher.
There's no doubt that it's a tough ayat to work with, especially in this age, where people can misinterpret things. But the Quran is really saying that that's an absurdity. I'd rather stay with the idea that the Quran is saying, extend the rope to the sky, climb it, and the outcome of that will be your own perdition. That's an absurd path. I'd rather take that, interpretation. That is an absurd path to take in life, so that we can look at ourselves and see and ask ourselves, are we really, following a path of benefit?
Jazakallah. We'll end it at that, Sheikh Yusuf. I'm really enjoying this discussions. I'm wondering who's benefiting more, you and I, or our brothers and sisters who are listening. But a bit of our homework helps us benefit. But inshallah, we ask our brothers and sisters to, during the day, if they can read that verse that we're going to be reading, maybe their psychology will be addressed in a very miraculous way by that verse for that day. And then hopefully they can join us and we can learn from their reflections as well.
And here, we want to remind everyone too that we have planned fasting for Arafah and for doing this session, on site.
Doing the last
other people being invited into it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll put details of one of the videos about that, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay, Jazakallah khair.
Barakallahu feekum.